It is July 28th. It is really hot and humid, and I am about to harvest a massive bunch of Lisianthus for flower subscriptions and a bouquet bar this upcoming weekend. But this video is all about Lisianthus. This is my third year of growing Lisianthus, and I grew 6 different varieties, which came in trays of 125 each. So after having grown now close to, I'd say, a dozen varieties, I wanted to share in this video my favorites, including varieties, showing you guys the height, what the habit looks like, the types of ruffles, as well as some of the colors that I'm now really leaning towards as I'm selling retail. So we are going to do this video in segments. I wanted to make sure I got out today so that you guys could see what this looked like before I snip them all off and put them into bouquets. Like snapdragons, Lisianthus also bloom in groups. So I bought all 3 groups this year to have a staggered bloom time. Group 1 blooms first, group 2 a little bit after, and then of course group 3. And I am finding this to be true because what you're going to see here is that the group 1s are all ready and the group 3s are just starting to come in. So the group 1s were starting to get ready about 2 weeks ago. Some of them had like that great first bud with that second bud starting to color up, but I would say that they really are getting into their prime this week, and 2 weeks ago group 3 was nowhere near close. So if you are looking to have that staggered succession, definitely go with the groups. Looking over here, I think it's pretty easy to see which ones are in group 1, maybe a little bit difficult to ascertain which are in group 2, but definitely which are in group 3. So what I want to do is I want to quickly show you what these look like as they're growing, the 6 varieties that I'm growing, and then afterwards we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive. This one is Celeb Rouge, so this is a group 1, and true to group 1, it was the first to bloom, and you can see that we've got 3 bloom heads blooming at once. What you find about Lisianthus is that even though they have all of these buds, they're not going to all bud up at the same time, but typically you can probably get like 3 to maybe 5 on a really good stem. Like this one is 5 over here, and the length is outstanding. So what I'm looking to keep a Lisianthus, I'm looking for excellent color, excellent habit in the form of ruffles. Celeb is bred to be like double layered, as well as that height piece of it. So that actually brings me to the next one over here, which is Corelli Sugoi. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. This is also a group 1, and this color is called Lavender Ice. The color is fine, but what I really don't love about it is the fact that it is relatively shorter. I mean, it's totally fine to use in bouquets, but nowhere near the length of Celeb over here. And you can see that there's a lot of water over here. We've had a relatively wet season overall. And I find that it's hard to grow white outside, so this is a little bit of risk growing something that's a little bit more pale lavender. They're holding up okay against the rain, but the petals start splaying open when they're a little bit too tired. And we took off the deer fence that Eric and I had put up before, and so when he mows, the grass comes on here, something I did not anticipate, and it makes it look a lot dirtier, especially on petals like this. So I think that it's fine to grow once for me. I'm probably not going to grow it again. And you can see that it starts off a little bit more lavender and then fades to like a pale, closer to white type of lavender. So that was the 2 group 1s that I had. Next, let's start with group 2, which is going to be one of my favorite series, which is the Voyage series. So this is Voyage Deep Rose, and I love everything about it. I love the deep rose color, I love the length, and I also just love how it looks more like a rose, this Lisianthus variety, than Celeb. And so there's nothing wrong with Celeb, but when you try to sell these retail to customer, they think that these are roses, and of course everyone knows what a rose is. So I think I'm going to grow both of these again, these exact colors, and I just think that a deep rose really helps pop in a bouquet in a way that it's hard for others. So I actually have the rose on 2 sides over here. So the main difference between this part of the row and this part of the row is that there was a test and control group related to me putting lactic acid bacteria, dipping the roots of the plugs in them before I put them in to see if I could mitigate fungal disease. And what's really interesting is that throughout the entire season, I didn't really see much of a difference. And as they start maturing, I do see the presence of the fungal disease a little bit more. So you can see over here that this one bloomed, but the leaves have all yellowed out. You can see, well, that's actually a bloom head, but you can see over here, this one basically aborted, that one aborted over there, more over here. And so I did a little bit more of the test group in the lab than having a control group. And the irony is that there are more in the lab group that are showing that fungal disease than not. So really nothing to report out over here. I don't think I have enough data. I'll try it again next year, but right now I don't really see a meaningful difference. But the reason why I got onto that train of thought was because that's why the colors are not all in one spot. So this is Lisianthus Voyage. I'm really, really glad that it's coming in. I also have another row of Lisianthus, and this is where we get to our other group 2, which is Rosita, an apricot. So she is also really pretty, reminds me more of a rose, a little rose, Rosita. Lots and lots of buds consistently. I find that the first one that I showed you, which was the Celeb, also had a lot of buds, but not consistently every single stem having that. You can see over here, every single stem is gonna have like 4 or 5 buds. So there's more over here, super, super, super tall. Although part of it, you can see that there's a lot of intercropping over here, but I do think that this tends to be a little bit taller. And then you can actually compare it to the one that I showed you before, the Sugoi. It is pretty small despite the intercropping. So that's why I think that it really is just a taller variety as a whole. And it is looking so good where I'm not gonna harvest any of these today because I want some more time for these buds to form. It's gonna be 94 over the next 2 days. So I think these are gonna pop and you guys are gonna see that later. If we move down over here, this was a sub that I had to take on. So I've grown the Elegance series before, but this one is Elegance Champagne and it is a group 3. So it has more of like a yellowy, pink, peachy type of tone. And as it gets more mature, it becomes lighter in pink and a little bit more peachy, kind of like champagne. And what I've liked about Elegance is the fact that I have always gotten long stems, not this long before. So I don't know what the difference was. Obviously, we do bury food scraps into the soil. I don't know if that's the reason why, but these are looking really, really good. Truly, truly group 3, which I love because I will be able to harvest off of these probably in 2 weeks and still have them for bouquets. The last group 3, we're coming back to the original row, is a little bit further along than those Elegance, and it is this one. This is Megalo Orchid. So Orchid is the color and Megalo is the variety. They're okay. That's all I have to say. I feel like the ruffles are a little bit more like tissue paper feely. It just kind of feels like someone stuck some tissue paper together and formed these ruffles. I'm not trying to bash this bloom. It's just a little less impressive when you look at it amongst the other Lisianthus. So I probably will not be growing Megalo again. I mean, the thing is, when you look at photos when you're purchasing Lisianthus, they all look really, really great. So I'm sure they're gonna look great in a bouquet. But again, why settle for something that you personally don't love when there's so much more greater out there? So I'm really excited. We're gonna harvest most of the pinks and then I'll come back. This video will follow up when I need to harvest more. It is now 2 days later and things are popping because we've had just high 90-degree temperatures. So just want to show you how the last group 3, is really starting to open. We still have some stems that haven't opened yet, but of course you can see the impact that weather has. So this is the one row, and then if I come over here to where the other row is, this is the champagne. This is Elegance Champagne, and you can see that the first buds have all started opening up. And what I find is that in the first group, when you have the first bud, it takes a while for the other buds to start opening up. But in this stage, because it's just so hot, you often have the second bud opening up a little bit more quickly, and you can even see the third bud is starting to open up. So all of these over here, if you were to harvest this today, there is a high chance of these opening. Sometimes the color isn't as vibrant, and it does help to have something like flower food in there to give it that sugar so that it could continue to open up with the color. But I just want to give you an update on just how crazy these are. And it looks like we are definitely going to have an abundance of Lisianthus. I have now harvested all 6 stems of the varieties that I'm growing this year, and I want to show you a comparison of these varieties. Already earlier I talked about there are certain types that I'm pretty sure I'm not going to grow and certain types that I want to grow, and I want to talk a little bit about what influences that decision. Some of them are just very common sense, but I think until you have a visualization, it's kind of hard to make those decisions. So here we go. I'm going to start with this one, which is the Celeb. This is Celeb in Rouge. And what I love about it is long stems, multiple bloom heads. So it feels like that there is a lot of perceived value. And I do have a tape measure. So I'm going to show you how tall these are. Of course, these are grown outside without any protection. And so let me put this over here so you can see that we are at, where is this? We are at 24 inches. So that is 2 feet. Definitely one that I would grow again. Next up, we've got one stem over here of Elegance Champagne. This was actually a last minute sub. So I've grown Elegance before. I've really liked Elegance because I knew they were going to be taller as well as have a spray of bloom heads, and this one did not disappoint. This year I really wanted to grow new ones that I haven't grown before, so I'm really glad that I got this sub. And coming in from a length perspective, we are at 26 inches. So like very little effort for me to get these to grow super tall. Elegance is one of those that I think I will definitely continue to grow. Next, we have Voyage. The Voyage series. This one is deep rose, so it is a deeper rose type of color. And this is a little bit of a smaller bloom head, not in a bad sense. Again, these are the ones that kind of look like roses, but if I were to compare this against the Elegance series, you can see that the bloom heads are definitely a little bit smaller, even against the Celeb series. Remember, the Celeb series are bred to be a little bit more ruffly. This is like a newer type of breed. So the newer breeds focus on a little bit of more of those ruffles and just like more outlandish. I've been told that the ruffles are a little bit hard to ship. So even though Lisianthus are grown internationally, especially in Japan, and a lot of their Lisianthus come here, that's why you can find them in grocery store bouquets, you're less likely to find a more ruffly one because they don't hold up as well in shipping. So I think there's definitely a place for a Voyage type deep rose, especially over here. It kind of reminds me of a medium-sized version of the Puccino, I think it's what it's called. I've seen those in person. They're really, really tiny. And although they're not necessarily a statement piece, I think that they look really, really great in bouquets. So this is Voyage. I almost forgot to measure this. So this one clocks in at 22 inches. Very respectable, 22 inches. All right, next we've got Rosita. This is the variety name, and the color is apricot. So you can see that it is a little bit more blush pink apricot. And I really do love this one too. I mean, look at how many bloom heads there are. Also very, very long stems. And if we measure it, we're clocking in at roughly also 22, 23-ish in height from an inch perspective. All right, so now we're gonna get into the lavender type of colors, and honestly, these are the ones that I'm less excited about. First, we've got Megalo Orchid. Typically, this is sold as like Megalo Grace Wedding. You get to pick which one you want. So I picked the Megalo. The color is pretty decent. I'm just less of a fan of the habit. It just feels like that if you don't harvest immediately upon it opening, it feels more like tissue paper. I don't know, like there's probably definitely a crowd that loves this. Personally, less so for me, but it does get a lot of credit for having multiple bloom heads as well as relatively decent length. So clocking in from a measurement perspective, we're around 21 inches. Very respectable, very workable in bouquets. Now, last but not least is my least favorite. This is Corelli Sugoi in lavender ice color. And in general, I'm finding that these tend to be shorter. These are actually two of my longer stemmed Corelli Sugoi. And some of them only have 2 bloom heads. Just consistently, you're seeing underperformance relative to like an Elegance, where all of these are like literally 95% look like this. So from a length perspective, my best stems are giving me about 17 inches, workable in a bouquet. But when you have like really long stemmed of other bunches, it becomes harder now to work this into a bouquet. So it's almost like this has to be its own bouquet. And again, from a color perspective, I do like the fact that it fades from this like lavender to white, so hence why it's called lavender ice. But also like growing light colors can be really difficult outside. So this was a risk that I knew I was taking. And like, you know, grow it once, probably won't grow it again. Now, this one, I think that if I wanted to grow something that was kind of like this, but a little bit with more flair, I would grow the Chateau series. So I grew Chateau last year, absolutely gorgeous. It comes in a more lavender gold type of like almost silver bloom, like, or it's really hard to explain. You have to see it in person. But it has a lot more fancier ruffles, and Chateau is a newer spread type of variety, again, kind of like the one I was talking about before with the Celeb, that is more ruffly in nature. The reason why I didn't grow Chateau this year, other than the fact that I wanted to grow new varieties, was the fact that Chateau also ended up being a little bit shorter. So I would say that Chateau stems on the whole were very similar to this length, but if I had to choose between Corelli Sugoi or Chateau, it would probably be Chateau. Now, take this with a grain of salt, because obviously my experiences may not be indicative of your experience. You might get fantastic length on this. You might also love the color and the habit. I think it's just a little bit hard to compete against the fact that I did grow other types of Lisianthus relatively successfully, you can see, and I got this. And so the opportunity cost is that one stem of this does not have as much perceived value as one stem from most of these over here, and therefore I need to put in 2 stems in order to make up for the perceived value of one stem over here. All of these Lisianthus cost the same. It's not like this one was a cheaper plug to buy, cheaper to grow. They're all the same type of cost in terms of cost of plug as well as the effort. So that's why this exercise becomes pretty important for us to figure out what are the varieties that not only do we like, but also perform the best for us so that we can get the most perceived value out of them. Today is August 4th, so just shy of a full week from when we were last out here. And I want to show you how things are blooming, because most of the group 1 is now done, with the exception of a few stragglers like this one. But the group 2s and the group 3s are definitely coming in. So you can see over here, this is a group 3. The ones that have multiple buds are blooming with like 4 to sometimes even 5 on a single bloom head. And what I love about this is that this is a really great staggered succession for me. So you can see most of the group 1s have been cut over here, except for the ones that weren't ready. This one over here, we've got 2 bloom heads, but there's potential for 1, 2, 3, 4 additional ones to bloom. And so what I like about this is if I don't need them this week, I can still have some time to harvest, because these buds are going to take a little bit more time. And so again, if you are planning out your Lisianthus for a longer succession, you can buy 3 groups, and if you grow them well and choose varieties that tend to have a habit of multiple bloom heads, then you can really get a good succession time period out of them. Now let's go over here, which is where the other row of Lisianthus is over here. Again, this is the Elegance champagne, and they are really, really popping. So these are, like this one has 3, 4, 5, that would 6 if I were to cut this one stem today. But I have a lot of buffer, again, because there's just so many blooms per stem over here. This over here you can see also coming into bloom. These will probably need to be cut probably like later today if I have time, but you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I love that little Rosita. And then there's some more over here. These are really looking like roses, the Elegance, the more they open up. And a lot of florists will reflex these stems, and they look so awesome, especially in a bridal bouquet. I can't tell you how many great comments I've gotten from customers on Lisianthus. No surprise there, but I really do think that Lisianthus is a crop that people are willing to get into their cars and drive a distance for. I'll say that I have neighbors around this area who will text me and be like, hey, do you have a bouquet ready? And I feel like that it's happened a little bit more within the past week since I've had Lisianthus, where people are asking for bouquets because they're visiting a family member or they want to give it to a teacher. So again, like this time of year is tough because it's so hot, but I think the Lisianthus will always have a place on our farm, and every year I just want to grow more, not necessarily less, because of how well it does for me. In another video, I talked about making straight bunches of Lisianthus for my flower subscription pickup this month, and they were still pretty profitable. So I have a Patreon post on breaking down all of my mixed bouquets for my flower subscription. June and July were dominated by perennials, June a little bit more than July. And the cost of a bouquet with just 100% of a premium focal like a Lisianthus wasn't actually that much higher than you would expect. And that is because when you do straight bunches, you are saving time in harvesting efficiencies as well as growing efficiencies even. So just so happy that we have this great crop over here to enjoy. It is now the evening, and I wanted to show you what small straight bunches could look like. So these are a total of 30 stems amongst 7 bouquets. So it averages out to about 4 stems per bouquet. One bouquet has like an extra 2 stems because there wasn't a ton of bloom heads on a couple of those stems. But you can see that they look pretty good. And so the way that I would price these if I sold these would be $20 each. And these are actually going out to ease teachers. Now, I want to show you the difference though. This is 8 stems, so an extra 3 stems. Definitely looks a little bit beefier. And this is what I gave to my CSA customers. I have one customer who's at work, who's a flower subscription customer, so I'm bringing that in for her tomorrow. But the rest are going to ease teachers. And again, the ability to have a single stem that can have like 4 to 5 bloom heads makes it possible for you to do this, right? So like, look at this, like there's really not a lot of stems, but tons of bloom heads over here. And so far, everyone has just really loved how these are looking in their living rooms. It is now August 8th, so another Friday. This is a full week after our bouquet bar from last week. And you can see that there's slim pickings. I actually had someone come by for a DIY bucket with Lisianthus as focals. Most of what's left is group 3. There were a few stragglers of the group 2s back there, but you can see that really it's just a group 3 that is left. And honestly, I really wish I had grown more. Again, this is about 700 stems, and I've really sold every stem that I could, and I could probably sell another 300-400 easily over the next 2 weeks. I've had to turn away some business. I want to talk about some of the other varieties that I've grown in other years and talk about implications as a whole for next year. And then the thing to remember is that I live in New Jersey, zone 7A, and what that means is that our spring, when the Lisianthus go in, which is sometime between early April to mid-April, is pretty cold and often wet. And then by the time we get to late June, July, that's when the heat really starts ramping up. I feel that Lisianthus is a relatively, I'm not going to call it easy crop to grow here, but our climate is conducive to growing this. Now, if you live in an area where it's a little bit more mild, one thing to remember is that Lisianthus cannot take the hot temperature in its early stages. In fact, if you look at the cultivar sheets, it will say that before the second true leaves, or before the second set of true leaves show, if you have even one day that's 94 degrees Fahrenheit or above, it will cause something called rosetting, which is basically where the flowers don't properly form. So just take that into mind in case if you live in a climate like that. But let's talk a little bit about some of the other varieties that I've grown. In years 1 and 2, I grew more of the old school varieties, the older bred varieties, so things like ABC, Mariachi, Echo, but one newer type of variety that I grew was called Chateau. And I would say that of all of the 4 that I just mentioned there, Chateau is really worth highlighting here. The drawback of Chateau for me, because I don't grow in a tunnel, is the fact that it does tend to be a little bit shorter. Now, I think that if you grow in a tunnel, you'll get a few more inches, but it is nowhere near like the Elegance over here that you're seeing. This isn't really a knock on the old school varieties. It's just, it's not a preference for me to grow. And I think that some of the comments that I made about the Megalo and the Corelli Sugoi, you know, it's hard for me to grow well, but I definitely recognize that other people grow them better than me and get better, fuller flowers. So I think a part of this is also really discovering what types of varieties work best for where you are. And I can tell you without a doubt, for me next year, I'm gonna be focusing on Celeb. That's a newer type of variety. Be focusing on Elegance. I'm gonna be focused on Voyage. Voyage is one of those like older school bred type of varieties, but again, I really like how it looks. I'm gonna also do Rosita, and then I think a new one I'm gonna try is the Puccini, I think it's called. It's like the really tiny heads, which a lot of people may think, hey, like why am I growing that? But I have seen it grown in person. I have seen how it looks, and while small without a ton of ruffles, it has a lot of bloom heads, and I think that it will create for a nice textural interest, especially if you're doing a Lisianthus straight bouquet. The other thing I want to talk about is just like how the success of Lisianthus this year has really made me rethink how I crop plan for next year. Like right now, today is actually nice outside, but in many parts of this video, it was terrible. But Lisianthus is one of those crops that will get people to drive out and buy flowers. And so the question becomes, how do you balance not having to grow a ton around when Lisianthus blooms to be able to make a fuller bouquet? What are some of the perennials that you could rely on? And really what I've settled on is, look, you can't time everything perfectly. So what you need to do is, if you know your Lisianthus are gonna come in at a specific time, you need to plan for 2 weeks before and after that as buffer. So what are certain things that you can grow that are very low maintenance, low cost? So 2 things come to mind: cosmos, as well as maybe some sunflowers. The cosmos for me is the #1 thing that I'm gonna try to grow a lot more of next year, because I can always use it in a bouquet, but it also acts as really, really great filler. And I found that just cosmos and Lisianthus, a bunch of that makes for a really nice, varied, mixed bouquet, even though it's not totally mixed. And this time of year, I also still have some mountain mint that I'm still harvesting and using. So what that means is that I'm able to have a focal crop that is high value not just from a pricing perspective, but the perception to customers, and perhaps not have to farm throughout the entire summer to have those continuous blooms, but maybe build my summer around Lisianthus. And so next year I do plan on potentially doubling. So we're talking about 1,500 stems of Lisianthus, and then having those cosmos around to support them, because what's happening this year is I don't have enough output to be able to support my my country store, which is one of my retail channels, which is not great because that means I'm inconsistent. I had plenty for my flower subscription customers. I gifted some to E's teachers, but I would like a little bit more to be able to constantly restock the country store versus just restocking once or twice a week. So I would love to hear in the comments which varieties you like, but also tell me, where do you live? What does that climate look like? Have you had success with some of the varieties that I haven't had success in growing, meaning they just look a little bit more plain and single? Which are the varieties that you would avoid? Which are the ones that you would like? And I hope that that comment thread is helpful for anyone else out there who is looking to grow Lisianthus. So if this video was helpful for you, I highly advise you to watch this video, which was my video last week talking about how I moved these Lisianthus in case if you're looking for ways to sell them and hopefully make a profit. Thank you all, and I'll see you next video.